Hello, everyone. I wanted to talk about who I dedicated my book, The Ecstasy and the Ignominy, to. I dedicated it to my dog, Barney, who passed away last year. It says, if you can see it, um, in memory of Barney, the dog, in memory of Barney, the dog that taught me how to love. And so I decided to dedicate it to him primarily because he died while I was writing chapter 23 of the book. And here's an image of Barney right here. That is Barney. And then, of course, there's Gizmo, who's still around. And these were the two Bassets we owned before that. George, who was my first Basset, and then there was Bill, who was my sister's dog. And so these are the Bassets we've with. Of course, Sam, is this picture is somewhat old. Isn't on here yet. We're going to probably make one later that includes him. But yes, this is Barney, who passed away last year when he was only 5 years old, when he had an unexpected diabetic condition, where even though he hadn't really shown any signs or symptoms of diabetes at all, really, of course, it was kind of difficult to tell because for the first 2 years of his life, Barney lived in the house that I grew up in town. And when we moved out into the country, we no longer had a fenced-in yard like we did in town. So he had to he and Gizmo stayed in a kennel that was built, where in order to interact with them, you had to actually get inside the kennel, which I would do as often as I could, but I obviously couldn't keep an eye on them, every moment of every day. But we built a fence though that would fence in the backyard. Finally, got around to it, but then just a few days after the fence was built and Gizmo and Barney were free of the kennel, Barney became sick, started puking profusely, and it was one of those situations though where it happened on a Saturday afternoon, and around where I live there aren't any 24-hour vet services that are close anyway. And of course, we didn't know exactly how much of an emergency it was, because he would puke sometimes, but he would acting lethargic, so he was sick, but he didn't seem like he was dying. But it worried me immensely. But then then of course we took him to the vet on Monday, and it turned out that he had a condition called ketoacidosis, which is where his blood sugar just became way too high. It was like at 800, and they tried giving him injections to get it down, but it didn't go down very much, and he passed away the next morning. And I think it might have been part of it might have been caused is that he had been treated several years earlier for an inflamed pancreas, which they gave him some medicine for, but they never really followed up on it. And they never at the doctor's office, at the vet's office, would ever check his blood sugar. And whereas now every year we check it ourselves, and in order to make sure that our dog's blood sugars are not too high. But he just had this bizarre condition that normally doesn't affect dogs as young as Barney, who was only 5. Normally they develop later, like when they're maybe 7 or 8. And so Barney passed away unexpectedly, and I got Sam as a result of that. And which is why every time I have a dog who has who may have a medical problem, even a slight one, I panic, because it's just losing Barney. It affected me in a very profound way. I was very depressed when it occurred. Some of you might remember I documented it with video, and because it's not that, and I was more depressed in some ways than when I lost my grandparents. Not that I think not that I love Barney more than my grandparents, but it was just because I lost my grandparents when I was 18, but now that I'm nearly 30, I think about things in a more complex way than I did when I was 18, and so therefore loss can be more can be deeper and can affect me more than it did in the past when my thoughts were not as complex. And of course, I was writing. I think I was on chapter 23 while I was writing The Ecstasy and the Ignominy, so it definitely had an effect on my writing style and definitely made it somewhat more melancholy. And so I thought it was appropriate to dedicate the book to Barney for that reason, to basically make a tribute to him so he can be immortalized in the pages of my books.